Israel go to Palestinian area. So the risk of occur of the conflict in Palestinian area will increase dramatically. So United States of America should go to border, and they should secure the safety. So we strongly propose this motion. What's the identity point of this motion? So after this proposal, the United States set the military base on the border. So this is our jurisdiction. So firstly, our point. First point is that United States is completed, and second is a problem. And the second is problem. So the conflict is the base. So let me talk about problem.
How can we decide the border between Palestine and Israel?
Already, the UN says that the line there are border, so therefore border. So therefore, and moreover, they already set the border. Israel government already set the border, so they set the place to live. So that is talking about the United States conflict. So firstly, United States have big power. So United States have big military power than much bigger military power than other countries. For example, they have many soldiers, they have many tanks and fighting plane or battleship or something. And why we should use the United States? Because the United Nations cannot use such military freely. So, however, only United States can use such big power. And why they have big sort matter? Because they, in order to make action as a world policy. So, to prevent conflict, they should do as a world policy. So they have responsibility. And secondly, double standard. So in Arabic Spring, the United States support anti-government groups who demand democracy. So the United States provides weapons to anti-government groups where they criticize the government severely on the international area or something. So they have to support such democratized movement. However, in the status quo, United States didn't support Palestine, even though Palestine demand democracy. So to resolve this double standard, they have responsibility to support such democratized movement. So sit down. Let me talking about the problem. So, and the status quo, Israel sent its citizens to Palestinian area, and Israel exclude Palestine to use military. So Palestinian refugee is increasing because their place are developed, and moreover, the PLO have already lost the power, and Hamas increased their power. And why is very serious? Because Hamas is offensive to Israel. So they have big possibility to fight against Israel. So they are very dangerous. And last year, so 300,000 people demonstrated for demanding democracy in Palestine, affected by the Jasmine Revolution. So they want democracy. However, the Israel don't want to such democracy in Palestinian area. So the antipathy against Israel will increase. So the risk of conflict will very increasing. Yes.
So where's the justification for the United States to actively intervene in the bilateral treaty without any consent of the both two countries?
Actually, as I said, the risk of conflict will increase, and actually, United States can move as a world police. So in order to become police, why is there police? Because to protect conflict. So we have justification. So how, after taking this proposal, United States have big power. So if they set the U.S. based on the border, the cause of conflict are declined. Sorry. So firstly, Israel cannot intervene more because as I said in the status quo, as I said, so under status quo, Israel sent their citizens to Palestine, so they should. So Israel cannot send more citizens, and moreover, they can. And if the Hamas want to fight, U.S. can stop the Hamas because big power. So if conflict have, and even if conflict have occurred, U.S. can control their conflict. So both sides have less incentive to battle, and even the conflict happen, the conflict become very limited. So the victim will be very limited. So we strongly support this conflict.
Thank you for adding that point. Unfortunately, that's also the JPDU.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Listening to Prime Minister's speech, I cannot understand why United States is uniquely responsible for such kind of action and what kind of solution we are going to achieve. First place, this is a crucial failure of today's opening government. Our side stance is clear. First of all, autonomy is important. Bilateral problem should be approached by the bilateral country. And moreover, this proposal rather causes conflict. That is why I'm very proud to oppose the motion. Before starting my speech, let me give you 4 rebuttals to the previous speaker. One, on the definition, he could not define details, so I clarify the definition. I think in the status quo, there is no border between Palestine and Israel. I think in the status quo, we cannot achieve such kind of agreement. That is why after plan, I think United States decided border about such kind of land for peace, and United States arbitrarily decide order, and United States scare such kind of border. I think this is the definition from opening government. Second limitation to this. They said in the status quo, United States are responsible for the action. However, actually, assumption of their side of the house is after plan, conflict can be stopped because of United States of power. However, I think it's not true. And I explain this mechanism in my point. Sorry. And even if it's necessary for intervention, United States is not the right actor because United States are not neutral position among Israel or Palestine. That's why their first point does not stand. Thirdly, they said, in the status quo, problem is so serious, we should intervene. However, we believe keeping status quo is okay because both in the status quo, both Palestine and Israel is disrupting their stance, right? Compared with the past, we see a lot of conference or dialogue or military, we see less military clashes, etc. Sorry. Why is it? It is because they gradually start to realize because of conflict, more people die, more infrastructure collapse, and this leads to unhappiness of ourselves. That is why they realize conflict is meaningless. That's why they try to achieve a more peaceful solution. That is why in the status quo, we see less conflict. That is why keeping status quo is okay, yes.
Because even for like Palestine, they are the Arab, they are influenced by the Arab Spring, and now they are activating for the pro-democratic movement in the Israel. How do you think that those like tensions are very low, even though like Benjamin Netanyahu are very actively occupying the self-government of Palestine?
Okay, my partner will explain. Firstly, I'm going to explain why principally this motion is not a stance. Okay. Okay. We believe generally bilateral problems should be solved bilaterally. It's because autonomy is extremely important, right? Actually, international law already admits autonomy is extremely important. It is because one, autonomy is a fundamental right as being a state to actually without consent of each nation, we cannot see the efficiency of such kind of deciding, etc. Sorry. That is why even if there is conflict between two countries, ICJ never ever intervene in such kind of country because consensus is necessary. Actually, autonomy of the country is extremely important. That is why we believe bilateral problem should be solved bilaterally. And what is the United States of America? Actually, United States, in this particular motion, United States is not so good actor to consider such kind of balance because actually United States is supporting Israel. They use amount of veto to be independent of such kind of Palestine. In this sense, we believe United States is not neutral position. That is why we believe rather we see possibility that the United States is deciding unfair border, etc. That is why we believe at first place, because there is non-consensus, the United States should not intervene in such kind of area. That is why on the principle level, this motion must not stand. Sorry. Moving on to practical consequences, why this motion is rather counterproductive in terms of conflict. Okay. After plan rupture, we believe Palestine become more aggressive and we see more conflict. Right? Sorry. Because one, United States is the country which is supporting Israel, as I have told you, because Palestinians are supported by many lobbies which have more power of money or donation, etc. That is why we see a lot of policy which is supporting Israel, such as usage of veto, etc. That is why the United States has more possibility to decide the border such kind of unfair. In this sense, Palestine gets angry. Palestine try to protect their own border, try to attack such kind of United States army. In this sense, we see more conflict between America and Palestine. We believe more conflict occur when people die, and Palestine gets angry. We believe this can lead to the solution. Sorry. And even line is somehow fair. We believe this is problem because Palestine have antipathy to the United States of America, because in the past United States always support Israel, such as veto, etc. That is why actually Palestinian citizens have antipathy to United States country. That is why United States set the border and walk border, It is the incentive for Palestine to attack United States soldiers. It is because Palestine fears. And Palestine think at first Palestine is angry to United States, and more Palestine fear United States become so aggressive. United States try to invade our country and so forth. That is why in order to protect themselves, they try to attack United States as self-defense and so forth. And United States try to restrain such kind of, oppress such kind of movement. Then Palestine rather get angry and they fear. That's why they try to attack and more conflict occurs. This is the problem after plan eruption. That is why we believe after plan eruption, actually, problem become more serious. From this reason, I'm extremely proud to oppose the motion.
Thank you, Professor Lee, for your remarks. I'd like to call for the HBDU
Mr. Speaker, my partner has explained that how in the status quo, the United States of America takes a double standard towards Palestine in the Palestine, Mr. Speaker. Even the United States of America supported the pro-democratic movement in the Egypt and the Yemen. When it comes to the Palestine, they do not do anything. They just criticize Benjamin Netanyahu, and they didn't do any support. And those kind of double standards for the humanitarian intervention for the Palestine people cannot be allowed in any way. We beg to propose. Firstly, limitation. Their statement is that, if the United States of America makes a basement along the borders between the Israel and the self-government district of the Palestine people go into the buffer zones of the US base and they attack the US military. Mr. Speaker, my partner has explained how in the status quo the Palestine people are not suffering because of the attack from the Israel. Because Israel always make towards the cluster bomb for the Palestine district, and now they are suffering for the occupation. The Israel government encourage the Israel people to move into the Palestine district, and they encourage them to live in the area, and they encourage them to exclude the Palestine people, and they force the Palestine people to exile to Egypt or whatever. We believe that of course even for the Arab people know that in the case of the Libya, or in the case of the Yemen, in the case of the Egypt, the Western countries support them to turn over the government, but they support them. Those Palestine people realize that they are the side. United States of America is also for the side of the Palestine people. Secondly, I would like to mention about the duty of the United States of America. Opening opposition also accept that in the past, United States of America encouraged Israel to oppress the Palestine people. Even for the Palestine want to be the member of UNESCO, the United States of America are not reluctant to allow them to be the member. They were always a pro-Israel stance. Mr. Speaker, we have to realize that this House, the United States, have to realize that the US make those situations. We have to compensate for the past behavior against the Palestine people, even though always US say we all respect the human rights. In the status quo, their houses were deprived by the Israel. They cannot resist to them because they do not have powers. They have nothing but to escaping from those kind of the worst scenario. US have the duty to compensate for them. Moving to my second issue, Nositan. I would like to mention about what kind of the people would be safe and how can this proposal prevent Israel from invading to the Palestine more. Mr. Speaker, as I tell, our side consistently told you that how in the status quo Israel invaded to the Palestine district, even if this argument is not completely neglected by the opening opposition. We believe that we can see the two benefits for the Palestine people. Firstly, because there are the basement around the borders of the Palestine and the Israel, those Palestine cannot launch the missiles to the Palestine district, but those people would not be killed, but the Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu, the Prime Minister of the Israel, cannot promote the occupation towards the Palestine district because there are always the patrol along the borderline of the Palestine and the Israel. Not sit down. Therefore, we believe that in those kind of situations, they would be safe because of the powers, because of the existence of buffer zones existing in those kind of the areas. Moving to my second issue. On my second issue, I would like to mention about how the Palestine people can enjoy the democracy because of the powers existing between the Israel and the Palestine. Mr. Speaker, in the status quo, there is no government in the Palestine district. Because if in the Gaza district, they have to rely on the Hamas, but in the Transjordan, they have to rely on the Fatah. Because even they are the terrorists, they have to rely on them. Because even if they cannot rely on the terrorist group, they would be invaded by the Israel. When it comes to the protections of the Palestine people, they have to rely on those kinds of very evil terrorist groups. And the reality is, because terrorist groups are taking the initiative in those kind of Palestine districts, United States of America and the EU nations imposing the sanction on those Palestine people. Now Palestine people are starving to death because they do not have industry in this district, and they cannot engage in trading anymore. Now they are in the worst scenario. The after taking the proposal, what will happen is that because the US existence of the United States of America existing in the buffer zone of the borderline and Israel and the Palestine district, they do not have to rely on the terrorist group. Therefore, they can have the fair election, and they can use their money only for the benefit, only for the improvement of the quality of life, Mr. Speaker. Therefore, they will not be suffering from death, or the sanctions for the Palestine district can be lifted by the international society. International society can give the aid to improve the quality of life. We believe those kind of benefits can be seen from after taking this proposal. So moving to my third issue. For my third issue, I would like to mention about how we can prevent the Middle East war by taking this proposal. Mr. Speaker, we now see the strong tension between Islam and Egypt, between Islam and Iran, Mr. Speaker, because Mubarak was turned over by the citizens in those kind of nations. Now anti-Semitism is widely spreading in the Middle Eastern area, and we believe that the Israel embassies in the Egypt was attacked last year. We believe that if we keep the status quo, of course, those occupation towards the Palestine district stimulate the attitude of the Iran or the Egypt, and because those Benjamin Netanyahu, a radicalist who said if Iran do not stop nuclear, do not stop nukes, they will attack the Iran and so forth. In order not to keep the tension high, the United States should prevent from enhancing the tensions between the Israel and the Arab nations around Israel. For all those reasons, we beg to propose.
Thank you, Deputy Prime Minister, for this one. I'd like to call upon Deputy Leader to review the debate, begin holding debate.
Land for peace is the peace between Palestine and Israel. This is not the motion to democratize the Palestine, Mr. Speaker. In order to democratize Palestine, we're very happy to support these countries. We're very happy to give subsidy towards Palestine. But even if we can achieve the democratization of Palestine, it doesn't mean we can achieve the goal of land for peace, Mr. Speaker. We say in order to achieve the goal, on our side of the house, the keeping status quo is better, because bilateral relationship should be solved by that country. The United States of America is not right actor to decide the line for that reason. For those reasons, we're very proud to oppose. I'm going to give you two things in my speech. Firstly, refutation to the previous speaker, and secondly, I'm going to talk about two issues. First, how can we achieve the goal by keeping status quo through the discussion between the Palestine and Israel? And secondly, I will talk about US do not have justification to make the line, and even if they have the justification, it doesn't mean we can solve this problem. So before that, rebuttal. Sorry. Firstly, they mentioned because of the rapid growing democratic movement is happening, it leads to conflict. Firstly, this is not the problem about land for peace, Mr. Speaker. Speaker, is problem of democratization of the Palestine. Even if Palestine gets democratized, it doesn't mean we can achieve land for peace. Because land for peace means agreement between the Palestine and Israel is achieved by both countries. If both countries agree, we are accepting this land is for Palestine, this land is for Israel, which means we can achieve the land for peace, Mr. Speaker. This is why democratization is completely out of debate. Secondly, they mentioned the responsibility of the United States of America. How to take responsibilities not this way, Mr. Speaker. We are happy to support the democratization, but we are not happy to support the line and deciding the line for all neutrality, the Palestine and Israel, because Israel is supported by the United States of America, and Palestine is not supported by the United States of America. It doesn't mean we have to support the Palestine. It means the United States of America have to withdraw the situation and keep it for them, because it's a problem between the Palestine and Israel. The argument doesn't make sense. Thirdly, they mentioned by taking this model, Israel cannot attack the Palestine. Maybe it is true. However, we do not accept that the Palestine have more antipathy towards the Israel or the United States of America and start to attack these areas. Right? I'll explain later in my substantive. Sorry. Fourthly, they mentioned the terrorist group is very, very problematic, like Hamas and etc., etc. Firstly, and even under their model, the Palestinians still rely on terrorists when they really want to get back to Palestine. Palestine is a very sacred land for them. Even if we take this model, it doesn't mean Palestine's desire would be achieved. It means if we take this model, such an antipathy rather increase, they still rely on terrorists. And even if they do not rely on terrorists, it doesn't mean terrorists become the normal person, terrorists become the innocent person, Mr. Speaker. Terrorists are the people who are very radical, and if they are the radical people, which means if they lose the control of the Palestine government, Palestine itself, they do the very attack to the United States of America or Israel, etc., etc. Rather, after taking the proposal, situation is very serious. Before moving on to our issues, if you have any point, I can open.
So, though like Palestine do not have autonomy to begin with, because like the Israel do not keep the promise of land for peace, how can you say like those like bilateral solution for both Israel and Palestine is necessary?
It's a very controversial issue in international society. One, there was an issue that Palestine should be a country, Palestine should be recognized as a one nation. Some people say Palestine is a nation, some people do not say Palestine is a nation, which means, Mr. Speaker, it's very controversial. We have to give it to the two countries and decide the line for it. It's not a problem. Moving on to the first issue, how can we achieve the goal by keeping with the status quo? Because there is a discussion, Mr. Speaker, between Palestine and Israel. These days, the tables for peace are held sometimes. Even if, Mr. Speaker, the conflict may occur, it's better to keep the status quo. Why? Because the true solution for this Middle East war is they do not have any antipathy each other, and they do not have any problem in the future. If they do not have the problem in the future, which means they do not have any antipathy again, the conflict would never happen, Mr. Speaker. In that situation, which means what is important is the agreement between the Palestine and Israel. If we do not have agreement, which means we cannot decide what is best for them. And by keeping the status quo, we can do such a thing by supporting those two countries' areas, or etc., etc. Mr. Speaker, in that situation, this U.S. arbitrary deciding the border is necessary. Moving on to the second issue, U.S. does not have justification and hostility will increase. Firstly, U.S. is not neutral, as my partner has already told you before. They supported Israel, no thank you, all the time. They do not support the Palestine, U.S. armed Israel army. Many times as a consequence in the Middle East war, Palestine lost their sacred place. Sacred places for the religion or the praying, etc., etc. And sacred place is very important. This is why Palestine has strong antipathy or hostility and historically. And secondly, the fundamental problem is which country should own this sacred place, Mr. Speaker. It's not related with the U.S. interest, the U.S. relationship. This is the relationship between Palestine and Israel. This is why we think the U.S. does not have justification, and this makes the feeling of Palestine, this situation is very unjust, and reminds citizens of antipathy for a long time. After taking this proposal, what happened? We cannot achieve the goal land for peace. Firstly, the violent backlash for the U.S. army or Israel can happen. Why? Because they won't get their land back. It's essential for them, as I told you before. The sacred place is owned by Israel, even under their paradigm. In that situation, the conflict can occur. For example, U.S. Army tries to secure the border. We see tremendous number of casualties in that conflict. It leads to more and more hostilities. Secondly, people feel oppressed even if conflict doesn't occur, because U.S. systematically and arbitrarily decide the line for territory. It means that hostility for the United States of America versus Israel is clearly increasing. And this leads to the future conflict, even if now we don't have conflict. And today mentioned that Palestine is tired, exhausted, they do not have the power to resist. Firstly, then why conflict between Palestine and Israel is so continuing for 40 years or 50 years? Palestine have the will to resist Israel even now. This means even after taking this proposal, they try to have the incentive to attack the U.S. Army or Israel to show their will to international society. Palestine blinds for Palestine. And secondly, they still strongly supporting the terrorists, as I told you before. Even if we take this model, we cannot banish that kind of problem, which means after taking this proposal back to us between Israel and Palestine, the U.S. Army and Palestine will surely happen. This is very serious to the casualty and people's life will be lost. For those reasons, we think bilateral problems should be solved by themselves. We are very proud to tell us.
Thank you. That's the position. I call for member of Congress to start the A-KobeA.
Yeah.
Thank you. We in the closing government have come here to actually state the meaning why the border should be secured, Mr. Speaker. Because we know that there is a growing threat. It's because it's happening mainly because the endless development of military spending in both countries. We believe this antipathy is actually coming mainly because it is unknown for a citizen to actually it's unknown for a citizen and in which circumstances they attack. In which circumstances your neighbor can be a terrorist of another country. We think division of those two nations, or division with two people, is so necessary to actually reduce the threat of both countries, which actually in the long term contribute why we can achieve this goal, what we are pursuing. We are very proud of that. Rebuttals first to the European opposition. Well, firstly, they said about the sovereignty. The sovereignty or autonomy should be recognized for both countries, not the United States. We think it's not true in that case. Because we think that conflict is itself is kind of humanitarian crisis. We believe that every single day that those people might be killed, or those people might be injured. We think in that sense, there is no reason to wait the consent of those two countries, because if we accept there's genocide, we don't need the consent of each nation. Exactly the same way, we don't have justification, we don't have obligation to actually wait the consent of those countries. Exactly the same way that PKO or any kind of intervention exists. Secondly, we think the sovereignty should recognize only when this actually tension or actually sovereignty itself are actually not affect to the international society. We think the conflict itself is actually not affecting those opponents itself, but also affecting to the whole society of the earth. Because, for example, the developing military spending are actually affecting to the conflict of Iran versus Israel. But more than that, we believe that a lot of refugees by this conflict is actually escaping to another country. So we believe in that sense, there's no obligation to actually have waive the consent or the obligation to respect the sovereignty itself. Secondly, they say that it is so difficult how to draw a border right now by this policy. But we think the key is actually not to decide where is the line, but the key is that it is division itself. We think when those people were tried it once at once, we believe it's beneficial. Why we think? I will explain it later on. Typically, they say that after they disposal, there is antipathy for the United States. We think this antipathy is much less than the antipathy that, so for example, Palestine actually have to Israel. Because obviously, the United States won't attack the Palestine or Israel if they don't attack, right? So exactly in the same way, we think the antipathy is not something that we have to concern. So first extension, the meaning that the border is secured. We think in the first place why there is a growing threat or tension between the two countries. That is because actually there's room to there's a room for each country or each extremist to move between the two nations. Because both two countries are incapable of securing or monitoring the border completely. What's the point? It means that in every single minute, where Hamas and Palestine can go to and move to another country to attack them. Because opening up a government has described that missiles can be counted. Because what we think in the majority of cases, those attacks were made in short ranges, like bombing by the terrorists, or actually guns, etc., etc. We think it's key that those opponents or extremists itself is in another country under the status quo. Why? Because there's no border and actually there's room for extremists to come into the nation. We think this is bad. Because people's lives are not secured. It incentivizes states or it incentivizes politicians to develop the power of military. We think that is the mechanism that those two countries are actually growing their threat and tension in the Middle East. Also, usually people want states to do by using their own money. Because if the states cannot do that those people might be dying tomorrow. So we believe this is the mechanism why the border is so necessary. But after the disposal, because now extremists are unable to come or actually attack itself and unable. Because firstly, there's nobody can defeat the military in the United States, right? For both of Palestine or Israel are unable to do that. But secondly, we think it is in the first place costly to maintain those military in the first place, right? For each country. Then those people are actually unable to each states are unable to defeat the military of the United States. We think it is useless to actually use or spend that money to those military development. But still more importantly, we think when the border is secured, the people's antipathy is less and lessened. Because there's no need to spend their money to the guns or bombs on the states. We believe it is the mechanism why this border, which makes each extremist unable to let into another country, is so important. Yes, Obi.
Okay, the antipathy arises from the point that the U.S. arbitrarily decides the line, and the Palestine cannot belong to the Palestine itself.
Why this antipathy is much more bigger than the situation that each bomb actually might come every single day. So we think that we don't understand. So secondly, why this policy enhances the possibility to achieve the goal. So why under the status quo, those land for peace is kind of unsuccessful is because those people or each states are actually developing their military spending every single day. That is because what this policy does is to actually make those states to reduce that development because there's no way to use that. In that sense, we believe it is for the first time to actually enable for two states actually discussion like the opposition or it might be closing opposition or actually supporting. We think that's the first. This is the first time that when those dialogue between the states are able to occur because there's no spending, there's no military threat, there's a room to compromise it because the compromising itself is not actually means the military control. So we think this is why this policy is effective in terms of achieving these goals that we are pursuing. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'd like to call on members to open the closing of the meeting.
ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Speaker, please take your breath and chill out once. What is our goal? Our goal is to achieve the land for peace in the first place, not helping Palestine from extremists or not democratize Palestine in the first place. Government side never ever explained why this policy is so effective to draw a totally neutral and the satisfactory line between those two states in the first place. And so, as closing opposition, we specifically focus on this policy and whether antagonize or and never reach the true solution in this debate. I mean, this policy is totally harmful to achieve the land for peace in the first place. So we oppose. And we have the three extensions in this debate. The first, and analyze the nature of bilateral treaty, how mutual recognition or the mutual satisfaction is necessary in the stage of international society. And second, and what the characterization of the U.S. military, how they are actually biased towards the Israel because of the IPAC. And third, I further explain why this consequence or why the consequence of this policy is totally detrimental for the deciding and the satisfactory decision. And before that, the several claiming towards the government side, entire government bench. No, thank you. Opening government explained to you how we can democratize the Palestine by actually supporting the Palestinians, the democratizing movement in the first place. Assumption here is the opening government assumed the United States can use its military freely, not considering anything. But ladies and gentlemen, opposition side has already explained to you. Because of the existence of IPAC, and this actually dominate the national politics of the U.S., even though the current situation of the Israel and the Palestine, it is something against humanity. The United States cannot use the military to save the Palestine. So they never explain how this policy is actually feasible in the first place. No explanation from the side of the House. And the closing government and in the second extension, this policy will efficient to decide the border. But ladies and gentlemen, and on the first extension of the closing opposition, and why the border, and according to their analysis, no thank you, and the border will be secure. But the opposition side strongly told you the definition of border is a very important problem in the first place. And as long as the United States is actually biased for Israel, and we cannot take a neutral decision, and I will explain in the extension. No, thank you. And on the second extension, it is something that might increase the possibility of the satisfactory decision, but there's the totally unclear explanation from the member of the government. So please clarify. The government will please clarify it in his speech. No, thank you. On to first extension, and I will examine the nature of bilateral treaty and why mutual recognition is very important. No, thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, because of international society is totally anarchy, there's no authority to make countries reconcile, and the international or the mutual recognition is particularly important to create the Southern Bilateral Treaty. No, thank you. Even ICJ needs the consent of the country to decide the fair decision. And ladies and gentlemen, the word mutual recognition is very important. As I already told you, the international society is totally anarchy. So the countries which is responsible for the decision of the bilateral treaty, thank you, is the only two countries in the first place. Because that both two countries is only responsible for the decision of the bilateral treaty, the mutual recognition of the bilateral treaty is particularly necessary to finish the conflict. No, thank you. On to the second issue, the characterization of the United States intervention. No, thank you. And the assumption of opening government, as I already told you, that the United States can completely use its military. But as I already told you, it's totally not false. They never consider the international politics of the United States because of the so huge influence of the IPAC, and it is the Jewish interest group, and they cannot use its military forces to support the Palestine because Palestine is an absolute enemy of the Israel. No, thank you. No, thank you. So they cannot use its military to save the Palestine. And the consequence of the using military, the U.S. military force is, and they have to use the United States have to use its military to support Israel, and more realistically, and they tend to be neutral to save the border, but the actual decision is implicitly biased for the United States. for example, no, thank you. In the stage of the deciding border, of course, the Palestinian claim and Israel claim is totally different. So the United States pretend to be neutral and make a decision to support Israel's opinion. That is a clear harm of this proposal. No, thank you. And it creates the antipathy of the Palestine. No, thank you. And the one further. Okay. So closing.
So please explain somehow that what we're supporting by bilateral treaties can relieve this growing threat that is happening now.
Important point here is, and what we have told you is that this policy will antagonize the relationship between Palestine and Israel, and we can only it's not our burden to completely achieve the bilateral treaty, but we can say no, thank you. It antagonizes the current situation, and we have to take a more distant position to achieve this policy. So it's not our burden. On to the last issue, the consequence of the policy and why only biased decision will be made, and it's totally against the nature of the bilateral treaty. Ladies and gentlemen, in the stage of deciding the effective border and effective control of the land is quite important, because one country can take an initiative in the buffer zone or the borderline, and their voice will get larger. Why? In the case of the Gaza, and Israel never compromised their effective control of the land, even though the Palestinian claim is totally unfair for the Palestine. And moreover, no one can punish the current situation. So the effective control of the land is quite influential to decide actual border between Israel and Palestine. And as I already told you, that because the decision of Israel is totally biased for the Israel, that's why there is no satisfactory solution between Israel and Palestine. And as long as I already told you, that in the first extension, the nature of bilateral treaty is a mutual satisfaction or a mutual recognition, it is totally we have to take the far away from our completion. What we've told is quite simple, and mutual satisfaction is necessary to achieve the goal of the bilateral treaty. And because of the biased decision of the United States, and we rather take a distance from our true goal. So to prevent such kind of situation, we are very proud to oppose.
Thank you, member of the commission. I'd like to call upon Government to conclude our case in THBT US.
No one in the world can make Palestine and Israel totally satisfied with their situation, whatever the situation is. But before anything else, what we have to pursue for is less possibility for both states to attack each other, less possibility for states to fear attack by other states. We think the secure border is essential for us to stop free mobility of violence. The only way to do that is not to trust in Palestine and Israel, settle the conflict by themselves, but to confirm that they cannot utilize most easy and thoughtless way, the violence, to achieve their own goal. We are very proud to propose. So there are two things I'd like to talk about. Firstly, the justification to do this. That is, I'd like to also deal with their argument about autonomy of these Palestine and Israel. We think this autonomy is totally invalid in this case. And secondly, about benefit and harm of taking this proposal. Whether this proposal can actually reduce danger of conflict, regardless of some so precious the mutual consensus of this land of peace. So firstly, justification to do this. Firstly, the problem we gave you is why we analyze why conflict is prolonged and why conflict is so severe in the status quo. The main reason lies in the situation that border is insecure and border is absent, right? Because if there's no one who limits the mobility of both states, or especially fundamentalists who always try to assault the other states other countries, that the institution, they can freely do it. They can freely attack the other states. We think that to this stance, there was no stance from the opposition side. Why is absence of border so good in their program? There is no explanation about that. But also, how absence of border leads to mutual recognition. That is also not explained by us. We think that there's something just wrong. But we think that our purpose is not perfectly consensual treaty. But we think, no thank you, what is more important is more effectiveness to stop mobility of violence, the mobility of fundamentalist mobility of those terrorists or those kind of people. So, what we heard from the opposition side in this respect was the autonomy of these states, the autonomy of Palestine and Israel to decide how they construct their relationship without analyzing what the autonomy is, right? Maybe it might be the sovereignty like that. We think that kind of thing, but that was never explained by that side of the house. But no, thank you. Even if it is that pointing to some concept like sovereignty. Now it is time we can sacrifice their autonomy, right? For example, first thing is because they are harming other nations, as open government briefly analyzed, that harming other nations by creating more and more refugees of conflict and letting them go to other countries around, right? But secondly, excessively making domestic citizens too willing to arm themselves. For example, women or children in Israel arm themselves because they are facing the constant danger, the situation in which Palestine might bombard them at any time so freely, or this constant fear that these states have always is the reason why these states do not stop their arming themselves. That was also analysis given by Hannah. But thirdly, they cannot stop by themselves, right? As long as border is absent. But we think that absence of public consensus doesn't mean conflict gets severer. At least the creating border on which United States Army are operating, we think that there's more capacity for the United States to stop both countries to attack each other. We think that this is better situation than in the status quo. They just said satisfaction of countries is important. But as I said in my introduction, no one can make these states totally satisfied with the situation. We think in this sense, there's no difference in the status quo and after plan. But what is different is more capacity for us to stop them from violence. So before moving on to the second issue,
Okay, please explain what is the connection between the stopping war and achieve the land for peace in the first place. Please explain the logical connection between stopping the war and achieving the land for peace. As long as the decision of the United States is fully biased for Israel, how we can achieve the such kind of
Okay, if war is stopped, it is peaceful, right? But firstly, less violence and less war and less conflict means they are more capable to talk about their own situation without relying upon violence, right? We think this situation is essential for them to not rely upon the so easy way to use violence to attain their goal. So secondly, benefit and harm, whether this proposal can reduce danger of conflict. They say Palestine gets angry without any consequence of this antipathy, right? Attack on American bases, but America is so strong, right? But secondly, no comparison with status quo, right? They are always angry in a sense, and they continue to be angry, especially because religious side is held by either state or for those kind of situation. The only way to prevent that anger from leading to more victims of conflict is to make sure that they are less and less able to attack the opponent state. And the only way to do this is to close borders tightly, more and more tightly, right? They said in the status quo, the both states are doing best to reconcile. Just assertion without any analysis. There was no process of that. But we think that, and also they attacked the feasibility of our proposal. But we think we do it anyway, right? That whatever is said by Jewish parties, we do send our armies to the possible border that we can arbitrarily set. And this arbitrariness is also good because their autonomy is now corrupt. So what U.S. military can do is to stop both Israel and Palestine from using violence. If you confirm that you aren't attacked and you cannot attack either, you would be less likely to rely upon violence. This is the goal that should be fulfilled by this debate. Because what is most important about the two countries situation is just conflict, it's violence, and we want to stop this, and that is why we are very proud to propose. Thank you.
Before I move on about three issues in this debate, I want to say one thing. Please read the motion. Because this motion is about under which paradigm is better in order to achieve the run for peace. But what we heard from the Thai government is they over-prioritize the tangible benefit. This is only the solution of the current problem. But they never analyze why the solution can be achievable for the run for peace itself. Because opposition bench recently told us the run for peace is about bilateral treaty between the Israel and Palestine. That is why we said in this occasion, the United States is not the one to intervene this issue. This is a simple reason we very proud to oppose three issues. Firstly, take a look of solution from the opening government. Why this solution doesn't fit the problem they told us in this sense. And secondly, why US isn't. This is a core issue in this debate. And thirdly, take a look at the content of their proposal. Why their goal cannot achievable in this occasion. Because opening of successfully told us why the status quo is much better in order to achieve their goal. The biggest contribution from the closing of is why their proposal is harmful to achieve the goal. So on the first issue about the solution we have from opening government. Opening government gave you the two main problems that said let's go. One, the opening government told us the many people on Israel come into and oppress the people in Palestine. But yes, we concede the problem. But we told you from the closing, this situation doesn't change. But even if we take this proposal, because my partner clearly told us by taking this proposal, because the US will be side with Israel. Israel has authority to Israel use their authority to dominate this area near the border. That is why the situation doesn't change in the first place. Mr. Chair, even if this kind of policy can be stopped in this occasion, this doesn't necessarily this motion starts in the first place, because the problem itself doesn't fit the motion in the first place. Second problem we had from the opening government is like the democratization of Palestine, the solution of the Middle Eastern war. The opening clearly told us it is not the spirit motion in the first place. Secondly, more importantly, even if we take this proposal in that area, terrorists still remain for the future, because for terrorists, they need military resources for people on the ground, people on the Palestine, which means even if we take this proposal, the people on the Palestine have to rely on terrorism to some extent. That is why their solution doesn't fit the problem. Thank you. They told us. On the second issue, why US isn't. The opening up told us the two reasons. Firstly, US is the kind of world police. They can do everything. Secondly, in the status quo, the United States takes double standard. First, the first point is about police. It not make sense at all, because even in case of police, they have to discipline the first place. That is the reason. For example, we have the UNSC in order to check the US and Russia and China and so on and so forth. That is why their analysis doesn't stand. Second, we think we think that double standard itself is a legitimate diplomatic strategy in the first place. That is why we think this is not reason to push the US to do that. Reason we heard from closing government is not the unique about the United States, because they told us because there is a human crisis, because the absence of border is very harmful, because both Israel and Palestine have no capacity to do that. But this doesn't necessarily prove why US should be the actor in the first place. This is what we told you from the closing opposition. That is why, as long as they never support the motion uniquely, as long as their analysis isn't relevant the motion uniquely, their analysis doesn't stand. So why US shouldn't in this occasion? My partner told you in the both practical and philosophical point. Before I move on.
What you say that the US would be the invader with Israel, what continues to say, or what the reality is, Israel do not need the supporters because like Palestine do not have the formal police or military to protect themselves because they are not
concede the Palestine that doesn't have the former territory. We can, US and Israel can do that. This is a quite big reason we told you from the closing opposition. So why US shouldn't in this occasion? First, practically, because in the United States, in the domestic arena, there is so many influence towards the Jewish people. The opening told you the United States is very bad. But we specify the name of A-KobeA. This is the core part of this debate. Because these kind of Jewish military groups, US military cannot use their military force uniquely. That is why even if US is the actor, as long as they cannot use the military force freely, they cannot achieve the goal in the first place. Secondly, more importantly, in the philosophical level, because mutual understanding, because mutual negotiation is necessary, we don't think the US is the actor. Why is that? Because by taking the proposal, both countries have to rely on the US force, because under their paradigm, US is only actor to secure the vote. Which means even if political attitude would change like the US, like Israel, like Palestine, once US make the decision, they cannot do everything because US is only actor in this occasion. That is why as long as bilateral treaty, as long as mutual understanding is so important, the US shouldn't actor in this occasion. So second issue, the consequence. The opening of told you why the status quo is the better solution. So what we suggest on the closing government is firstly we have to recognize that people on the ground, both of the Israel and Palestine, have a different definition of the border. That is why the evidence that so many Palestinian people living in the near border of Gaza. But by taking this proposal, because Israel will have the authority, simply because the United States will support the Israel. My partner clearly told you. That is why as a consequence, for example, if people on the Palestine living in Israel, they can do everything like using drone to kill so many civilians in this occasion. That is why as long as we can achieve the goal, this is the spirit of motion. We do not change this proposal.